Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to a Watchman Newscast live stream. It is Wednesday, July 5th. I hope everyone had a great 4th of July. If you are watching here in the United States, where I am coming to you from, it was a great Independence Day for my family and I. Just thankful and blessed to be born and raised in this nation. And it really is driven home every 4th of July. I hope every one of my fellow Americans watching feels the same way. But we've got people from around the world watching on the live stream here from every continent except Antarctica. Although I do like to say maybe there's a few penguins down there on their iPads watching as well. But in all seriousness, we'll have Africa, Asia, Europe, Latin America, and beyond joining us today. And that's one of the great things about the live streams, because I'm able to connect with you directly for a full hour, and we're live. So we'll be taking your questions as well for our Q&A session. Hey, we've got some breaking news that the mainstream media, I know you're shocked by this or not, the mainstream media seems to be largely ignoring and downplaying. Imagine that. Another confrontation at sea today, July 5th, between the U.S. Navy and Iranian ships. And look, I've been very tough on the Biden administration, if you watch this newscast on a regular basis, about its soft, and that's being generous, stance when it comes to the Iranian regime. But today, at least, the U.S. Navy stepped up and averted what could have been a major crisis near the Strait of Hormuz. We want to talk about that and the broader implications there. Also, of course, we want to talk about Israel's just completed major military operation in Jenin. Folks, I'm calling this two major L's, two major losses for the Iranian regime in the span of 2 days. Number one today in the Strait of Hormuz, which we'll discuss in a minute. But this Israeli military operation in Jenin, which is located in the northern West Bank, an area we call Samaria here on the newscast, just to lay that out there as we kick off here on the live stream. We refer to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria whenever we can, because that's what the Bible calls it. It is the biblical heartland. So Jenin is in the northern part of Samaria, and I call it an L, a loss for the Iranian regime, because the main focus of this Israeli operation was to root out Iran-backed terrorists, chief among them Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And according to Israel's defense minister Yoav Gallant and IDF leaders, this operation, again, 2 days, but the IDF acted, number one, with the element of surprise. Number two, they acted swiftly. And number three, they acted with more force than we've seen in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria in about 20 years. I mean, some 1,000 Israeli troops entered Jenin, supported by air power, including drones. So a lot going on to discuss. The Iranian regime took, in my view, it was a major setback, an L, as I called it, for their plans to establish a new terror foothold in the West Bank. And of course, in the Straits of Hormuz, attempting to seize 2 oil tankers, as we will discuss shortly. So whenever this wicked regime in Tehran suffers setbacks, that's a good thing, needless to say. So we're going to break that down. Also, this is a very relevant week for me personally. July 3rd in particular was a big date in my life some years back. And because today's July 5th, July 3rd just passed, it was the 30-year anniversary. This is very hard to believe, folks. Something that happened to me that truly affected my life and my walk with the Lord on July 3rd, 1993. I cannot believe it's been 30 years, but it has been. Some of you have heard me in the past share parts of my testimony. Well, this is a crucial part of my testimony that went down 30 years ago. I might be dating myself. Did you really think I was under 30 years old? Probably not. But in all seriousness, a lot of prayer, a lot of just thinking, a lot of thanks to the Lord during this week as I mark this 30-year anniversary. It's something I rarely think about. It was a traumatic incident in my life that I rarely think about. But 30 years is one of those threshold dates, right? So because of that 30-year mark, I did think about it. I reflected on it a bit, and I was just glorifying God for everything he's brought me through. I'm going to share it with you towards the end of this live stream so you get to know me a little bit better. And that's why I love these live streams. Generally, on our daily newscasts, we have, 10 to 15-minute commentaries. But on the live stream, I cherish these hours, 1 hour per week we do it. I cherish this time with you all because we get to know each other a little bit better. It's more conversational. There's give and take, which brings me to the end of this newscast. Not only will I share part of my testimony, but your questions. Make sure to send along your questions for our Q&A session. Send them along, and we always get great ones, and we will pick those out as well. And of course, if you've never joined us before or you're joining us and have yet to click the subscribe button, hey, go ahead and give us a subscribe. It's absolutely free to subscribe to the channel. Just click subscribe and also hit the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. I've mentioned this in recent weeks because it stuns me that only 27% of our regular viewers are actually subscribed to the channel. So that means 73% of people who watch this channel on a daily basis have not yet subscribed. Now, we've got 647,000 subscribers by the grace of God. Imagine if all of our viewers subscribed. We could really expand our territory and the message for such a time as this and get the word out around the world even more, and continue to fulfill the duty that we believe God has given us on this channel. We say this channel is by God and for God. And if we're walking with him and we're following his lead, we know he'll continue to open doors and expand our territory. So let's get into it. You see the title of today's newscast says it all, but there's more to add. The U.S. Navy confronts Iran near the Strait of Hormuz and foils an oil tanker seizure. What exactly happened here? Well, we've seen this many, many times, and we have reported on this many, many times over the past few years. The Iranian regime's nefarious activities in the Gulf of Oman and that strategic waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, which a good chunk of the world's oil supply moves through every day, in which Iran consistently threatens to shut down. We've seen these hijinks from the Iranian regime, hijacking ships, kidnapping. I don't know if kidnapping is the word, although they have kidnapped the people aboard these ships, oil tankers, fuel tankers, the Iranian regime, and many times operating in, they're almost, not almost, I think you could call them speedboats, but they're armed, obviously, and you'll have a number of these speedboats manned by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps will swarm a vessel at sea. And they will board the vessel, armed obviously, and they will seize the crew at gunpoint, and they'll seize the vessel and take it back to Iran. We have seen this, folks, time and time again. I reported just a month ago here in the newscast on a segment that a lot of people were very, very interested in, how the U.S. and U.K. navies combined to essentially chase off one of these, can't call it a fleet, but a crew or whatever you want to call it, a gaggle of these Iranian speedboats. They were chased off by the U.S. and U.K. navies. Now today, not sure if these, I don't believe these were the Iranian speedboats, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard speedboats. And by the way, you hear speedboats and we'll get some commenters saying, oh, it's just speedboats. Come on, that's not a threat. Number one, this isn't something out of like a Mountain Dew or Coca-Cola commercial with a bunch of people in a lake on a speedboat. These are well-armed, well-trained Islamic Revolutionary Guards terrorists, several of them in several of these speedboats. And number two, if you don't think that can do any damage, think back to the year 2000 and the USS Cole, when 17 U.S. servicemen in Yemen were killed by an al-Qaeda terrorist, a suicide bomber, who pulled up to that ship in a speedboat. So I digress. Just wanted to lay that out there. But before we get any of the scoffers saying, well, it's just a speedboat. No, not just a speedboat. But at any rate, these were two Iranian ships today, according to reports out of the region. And they approached on two separate instances, or in two separate instances, these oil tankers near the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the first attempt was thwarted when a U.S. Navy destroyer essentially confronted these Iranian ships and chased them off. But a few hours later, these Iranian ships returned and tried once again to seize another oil tanker that was transiting through that area. And again, the U.S. Navy destroyer chased them off. So the Iranian regime was unsuccessful in two attempts to seize fuel tankers. And apparently the second attempt was rather far off the coast of Iran. So Iran can't claim, well, they were in our territorial waters. No, they can't claim that. This is the Iranian regime again and again with this provocative, nefarious behavior. Again, we have seen many, many times Iran seize fuel tankers and other sorts of ships. By the way, was it 2016, January 2016, I believe, yes, under then President Barack Obama, some 10 U.S. sailors were seized by the Iranian regime and basically held captive for several hours. Iran beamed the footage as a great propaganda victory around the world. It was a national embarrassment for the United States. So again, this is old hat for the Iranian regime, but it was refreshing today and a month ago, along with the UK, to see the U.S. Navy say, you know what, we're not going to take this. This is intolerable and it's unacceptable, and we're not going to let you dominate the waters of the Middle East when we're there and act in an aggressive, provocative manner and get away with it. Because, folks, the MO of the Iranian regime since 1979, since that Iranian Revolution, has been getting away with it. Time and time and time again, this regime has not been held accountable. They are literally getting away with murder. And the way they do it is pretty simple and pretty clever on their part. We've got thousands watching now, by the way. We'll have thousands more before we are done. Great. I see New Guinea. I saw South Africa a minute ago. We see, throughout the United States, Indiana. I'm just looking at our chat right here, just on the side of my laptop, giving everyone a shout out. So that's great. But listen, again and again, the Iranian regime, how do they do it? They act through proxy. You know this. You watch a newscast on a regular basis, but that gives them plausible, or I should say implausible in my eyes, deniability, where they say, hey, we didn't do it. Oh, Hamas attacked you. Hezbollah attacked you. Maybe a Shia militia in Iraq planted an IED and murdered some American soldiers there. It wasn't us. We didn't do it. No, you didn't directly do it. In some cases there were, but in some cases there weren't actual Iranian fingerprints, maybe on the IED. But the IEDs were made in Iran and supplied by the Iranian regime and then planted by an Iran-backed Iraqi Shia militiaman. That's how Iran does it. So we didn't actually pull the trigger, but one of our proxies did, and they call this plausible deniability. Implausible is more like it, but this is what Iran has done for decades and decades. Did Iran really pay a price? From a U.S. perspective, I'm coming to you from the United States, of course, although we have viewers around the world. Did Iran really pay a price for the seizure of the U.S. Embassy in 1979? The day President Ronald Reagan took office, those hostages were released. But were there really consequences for the Iranian regime? Yes, they got obviously embroiled in a bloody, horrific 8-year war, the Iran-Iraq war. Some 1 million people were killed. But were there really direct consequences for Iran from the West in that instance? And what about 1983? The U.S. Marine barracks bombing in Beirut, some 243 U.S. servicemen killed by Iranian-backed Hezbollah terrorists. Did Iran pay a price there, really? And you could take it on and on and on over the years. At least 500 U.S. servicemen during the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, killed by Iranian-backed terrorists and by Iranian IEDs, et cetera, et cetera. So when has Iran really paid a price for this behavior? It's been quite the opposite, actually, in that they've actually been rewarded. Look no further than the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, where this regime was gift wrapped, and I mean gift wrapped, billions of dollars, billions in sanctions relief. Some of that was cold, hard cash, literally delivered in an unmarked cargo plane by the Biden administration in the dead of night. Folks, that ain't consequences for bad behavior, to say the least. That's rewards for bad behavior. And this has been the MO time and time again. So when I say that I'm encouraged by what I saw today, I don't expect it to last and be a consistent thing under this current administration in Washington, D.C. But anytime the regime in Tehran is thwarted from carrying out evil, I'm happy about that. Now, really the only player in the region, and I'll give you an example. The current administration, you're not going to have a real true confrontation of the Iranian regime. And by confrontation, I don't mean a military invasion or bombing the regime. I mean holding this regime accountable, ramping up the sanctions, challenging them at every turn when they pull stunts like they tried to pull today, and having a no-nonsense, aggressive attitude, no nuclear talks until you abandon terror, until you abandon not only your nuclear program and uranium enrichment, but your ballistic missile program, until you abandon sponsoring the likes of Hamas and Hezbollah. The previous administration, the Trump administration, did exactly that. The ultimate accountability, Qasem Soleimani, the not so dearly departed terror master, was eliminated in January 2020 in a drone strike. So say what you want about the previous administration. It did have indeed a tough line with Iran, identifying Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps as a terror group supporting Israel, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, opening the embassy there, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. So say what you will, but when it came to Iran, the Trump administration was 100% on point, no doubt, and dealt with this bully in Tehran the way it needed to be dealt with, in my view. When it comes to the current administration, we're not seeing that. And then some. We're seeing a regression, a backsliding, to the point where the Biden administration reportedly wants to once again forge some sort of mini version of the Iran nuclear deal. Folks, that's where we're at. So when the U.S. Navy steps up and literally foils evil like it did today, it's encouraging. But again, in terms of a long-term outlook here, when this administration in D.C. right now clearly wants to forge that new Iran nuclear deal or some variation of it and just appease the Iranian regime. Essentially, this administration is saying, hey, we want to focus on fundamentally transforming America. We can't be distracted by foreign policy right now. That's pretty much the message. So Iran, here's a few $1 billion. Please just leave us alone. That's pretty much the stance in D.C. right now from the current administration. So that's the situation there with the U.S. and Iran and what went down today. I wanted to share that with you because it shows that Iran is still, and a key point here, folks, not the Iranian people. Please remember this. When we talk about Iran, I take pains to make clear that I'm talking about the Iranian regime, the men at the top in Tehran, not the Iranian people who are the main victims of this wicked regime. The Iranian people for the past 44 years now, hard to believe, since 1979, have lived under the jackboot of this tyrannical regime. So pray for the Iranian people who've been in the streets on many occasions over the years, have been over the past year. There were pretty serious protests that we reported on here in the newscast. The church in Iran is growing. The Christian population there, against all odds and largely operating underground, is expanding because, folks, you can't stop the gospel. If history has shown us anything, a regime after regime, tyrant after tyrant has tried, but ultimately you cannot stop the gospel. That even includes inside Iran, not to mention China and elsewhere around the world. So be encouraged by that. Keep the persecuted church in Iran in your prayers. Again, this could be a death sentence. If they are found with a Bible or worshiping Jesus, that's a death sentence. Clearly, you need to keep them in your prayers, because as the fastest growing church in the world, something to encourage you. The church in Iran right now, by many accounts, is the world's fastest growing, and it's almost entirely underground. Pray for these brave brothers and sisters in Christ, folks. And beyond that, pray for the average Iranian on the street who's not a believer, who's not a follower of Jesus. Pray for them. Also, for the gospel to spread there, for them to come to the Lord. There are so many people in Iran right now who are atheists because they look at the Shia jihadist Islam of the Iranian regime and they say, if this is God, I want no parts of it. And what a sad thing that they've completely turned away from God. And we're talking about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob here, the God of the Bible. And that is where we want to see the revelation for the Iranian people. So I say all that to say, keep Iran in your prayers, folks. This is a Bible land. Remember, current modern day Iran, look, that's ancient Persia. Think of Mordecai and Esther and Cyrus. These are biblical heroes, great biblical figures. That was ancient Persia. It's a Bible land. And I don't believe God is done with that land. Now, we know what the book of Ezekiel says very clearly. Chapters 38 and 39, that coming war of Gog and Magog, Persia will be one of the nations that will come against Israel in, quote, the latter days. It doesn't end very well for them, to say the least, as they meet their demise on the mountains of Israel alongside Russia and others, Russian forces and others. But I do believe that perhaps could even be the impetus for a great revival in Iran. If that regime is finally toppled and weakened to such a degree where it's literally God himself who intervenes directly, that obviously would have a profound impact, not only on the people of Iran, but around the world. Hey, we live in Bible times. We live in prophetic times. Do not kid yourself. If you think you can bury your head in the sand and weather the storm and that things are all going back to normal soon, you've got another thing coming. This is no time to be walking the path alone. What do I mean by that? You need the Lord. You need that relationship with Jesus now, folks, more than ever. Because if you're trying to stand against the gathering storm all alone, yes, you've got your family, but you need more. Your family and you need more. You need that peace that surpasses all understanding, and that knowledge and that assurance that you know where you are going when you die. And you know that you have the ultimate rock in your corner when things are really hitting the fan, which they're doing now and they're about to do to an even greater degree. If you want that assurance, you want that peace, look no further than Jesus. And this is not the time. I talked to a few people on vacation recently. This is not the time to put it off and say, well, I'm going to get back to church or open a Bible or start praying. Once I finish school, I have to fix a few things in my life, and then I'll get right with God. Look, things happen suddenly, and things are happening swiftly. Look at what you're seeing in the world right now. Even 5 years ago, could you have foreseen some of the things we're seeing right now that have become normalized? We live in times where good is called evil and evil is called good. Things we never thought we'd see have now become commonplace. So I'm sorry, you may not have another year or two until you get done school or get a few things right in your life. Then I'll start praying again. Then I'll bring God back in my life and reestablish my connection with the Lord. You may not have that long. We are in tumultuous times, folks. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just being honest with you and straight up with you. That's why I love these live streams, because we do get a chance to have more of a conversation. It's more conversational. We go for a full hour and we're able to unpack a great deal of things. And listen, I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't sharing this with you. And my job ultimately, it's more than a reporter, it's more than a host. My ultimate job is an ambassador for Christ. I'm an ambassador for Christ. I interview ambassadors from around the world all the time for the Watchman and other TBN programs. But at the end of the day, my main job, father, of course, and an ambassador for Christ. And this is part of being an ambassador for Christ, representing him to the nations for such a time as this. And that's why I'm going to share a little bit about my personal story at the end of this live stream. So you do not want to leave. Stick around. There's something I'm going to share why this was a profound anniversary for me this week. 30 years, hard to believe. But look, if you've got a great testimony and you've got a great story, what good is it if God's done incredible things in your life? What good is it to just hold that all in? Shouldn't you share it? If God has blessed you and done amazing things in your life and gotten you through storm after storm and been good to you, shouldn't you want to share that with others? If you love people, shouldn't you want to share that and say, hey, he did it for me. Certainly he can do it for you. I certainly feel that way. Once I became a Christian, wow. For me, I had a desire not to thump people over the head and to be overbearing, but whenever I can. And the main way to do it, whenever I can, not to thump them, but whenever I can transmit, I guess you would say, the love of Jesus and the truth of the gospel. And the main way we can do it, last thing I'll say on this, as ambassadors for Christ, is to simply live out our faith. Live out your faith. That's it. Preaching the gospel is great. But for some, they're watching more closely your personal example and how you conduct yourself. Do you walk the walk? Do you practice what you preach? That, I believe, is the main way that we're going to reach a whole lot of people in these days. Okay, let's talk about that Israeli campaign in Jenin. In the biblical heartland of Samaria, Jenin is a city there. Also, it's a Palestinian refugee camp that's really expanded there. It's not just some tent city. It's a major, a large, can you even call it an encampment at this point? It's been decades. Jenin is a city. And the bottom line is it has become I think I called it at the top, a hornet's nest and a terror base for, in particular, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, various Iran-backed terror groups. And by the way, remember, questions at the end for our Q&A session. But various Iran-backed terror groups, chief among them Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Long story short here, folks, Iran wants to open multiple fronts against Israel. We've talked about this on the newscast. Look, they've got Lebanon. They've got southern Lebanon in the form of Hezbollah, their most lethal proxy, some 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel from southern Lebanon. You've got, obviously, Gaza with Hamas and Islamic Jihad, two more Iranian proxies. You've got the Houthis to the far south in Yemen, another Iranian proxy. And then in Syria and Iraq, you've got those various Iran-backed Shia militias. And Iran itself, Iranian Revolutionary Guards foot soldiers and Hezbollah foot soldiers are also very active in Syria as well. We call this the ring of fire that surrounds Israel right now on all sides. And just a side note, kind of funny, I mentioned the ring of fire on Monday's newscast. We had a commenter, God bless him, who said, just so you know, the term ring of fire has been used before. It basically describes that seriously active volcanic earthquake region, the Pacific Rim. Obviously, I know that the ring of fire describes that. I didn't reply, God bless him, but it's like, and he said, what did he say? Not to nitpick or something to that effect. And I said, okay, that's exactly what you're doing. Obviously, I know there's a ring of fire in the Pacific, but I think that term also obviously fits to what is surrounding Israel right now in a different connotation, of course, but Israel is surrounded on all sides by eruptions of terror, no doubt, armed to the teeth with rockets, missiles, attack drones on all sides. The Iranian regime wanted to open, and still wants to, another front in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria to Israel's east. And Islamic Jihad and Hamas in recent weeks, leaders from both of those organizations have visited Iran to get their marching orders from the Iranian regime. Folks, do you really think it's a coincidence that leaders from Islamic Jihad and Hamas were in Iran over the past 2 weeks, meeting with, among others, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, and then things flare up in Jenin? And during those meetings, openly, Iranian and Islamic Jihad leaders said, we want to open a new front in the West Bank. They said it openly. And the leader of Islamic Jihad said, we are arming our people throughout the West Bank and in Jenin. You do the math, and you wonder why there have been some 50 attacks launched from in and around Jenin against Israelis over the past year alone. And you wonder why Israel finally said enough is enough. And we have to go in. We have to root out this terror. So late Sunday night, early Monday morning this week, some 1,000 Israeli soldiers, again, backed by air power, went into Jenin, and they rooted out the hornet's nest. I've got some comments from Yoav Gallant, Israel's defense minister. Let's get to them now. From the Times of Israel, he made some statements today, and here's what he said. Again, this is Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant. The goals of the Jenin operation have been fully achieved, and most of the gunmen fled or hid among civilians. What courage! Hid among civilians. The human shield factor. We see that time and time again with these groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah. Okay. Yoav Gallant said the operation fully achieved its goals in Jenin, but it is, quote, not the final word as far as we are concerned. Israel knows that these groups will regroup in Jenin, and eventually Israel, in some form or fashion, will likely have to go back in. But as I mentioned at the top, folks, this was the largest operation in the West Bank in over 20 years, since 2002 in Jenin. So this was a big deal this week. It didn't get as much media coverage as it should have, number one, because we're talking about the mainstream media. But number two, obviously 4th of July holiday. But this was a big deal. The largest operation in the West Bank in over 20 years. So Gallant said it may take another round or two. I'm quoting him directly, but the situation today is not the one we faced at the start of the week, meaning this is a better situation for Israel now. He said, we brought down the terror factory that was built in Jenin. These were many dozens of sites that hosted bomb workshops, weapons labs, weapons caches, as well as security that was guarding the entrances to the camp, the Jenin camp. And as of this morning, Gallant said the IDF and Shin Bet have greater freedom to act in Jenin. And last thing I'll say here, Gallant added that at the moment of truth, the terrorists in Jenin chose to hide or flee. These are gunmen fighting for money or to show their friends that they're heroes, he said. Most of them left, and those who stayed hid within the civilian population, including in hospitals and places with children. I think this testifies most of all to their cowardice, Yoav Gallant said, and I can't help but agree. But we've seen human shields employed time and time and time again. And it's funny, we'll get some troll commenters sometimes who say that Islamic Jihad and Hamas and Hezbollah, they're freedom fighters, they're fighting the occupier, the oppressor. And when you bring up things like, hey, they're using little kids, toddlers as human shields, there's no response. The response is Israeli occupier, Zionist oppressor, but facts, as Ronald Reagan once said, are a stubborn thing. Human shields, once again, the Jenin operation seems to have been very successful. Question now, how does Iran respond? We saw some rockets launched out of Gaza by Hamas overnight. Israel responded with airstrikes there. But how does Iran respond? And you said, wait, I thought you said Hamas launched the rockets. Yes, Iran's proxies. Iran will respond, as we said earlier, remember, plausible deniability. Iran will respond through proxy, whether it's Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. How do they respond? Do they want to take this to another level after this Jenin operation? We saw, obviously, I should have mentioned this at the top, but in case you missed this, a major terror attack in Tel Aviv. Early yesterday, a car ramming, at least 9 people wounded near a busy Tel Aviv outdoor mall. A terrorist rammed a car near a bus stop and jumped out with a knife and started stabbing civilians. He was killed. He was neutralized. But will we see more like that? Obviously, we've seen many, many attacks like that over the past several months. It's one of the reasons Israel went into Jenin in the first place, the main reason. Do we see rockets launched? So we shall see. Much of this, as always, depends on the direction given by the head of the snake. Who is the head of the snake when it comes to regional and really global terror at this point? The Iranian regime. As the Iranian regime says or directs, so goes terror in the region and the onslaughts against Israel. It's real simple. So at the end of the day, ultimately, you're going to need to deal with the head of the snake, and that is the Iranian regime. And I believe that day of reckoning for this regime is going to come eventually, and I believe it will come in the form, very likely, of Israeli strikes against Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. I think that's not a question of if, but when, because they're not going to stop. They're very patient, are the mullahs in Tehran. Look, if it takes them another 30 years, they're going to continue to push on. If they can get the West and the United States to agree to a terrible deal and give them billions of dollars in sanctions relief once again, and just play out the string until they can eventually break out and announce that they have the bomb, they'll do it. Now, I don't think they've got 30 years, even 20 years, if you listen to them. First of all, if you look at the prophetic timeline, things are ramping up. But if you listen to Iran's leaders, Ayatollah Khamenei, as I reported here in the newscast a few weeks ago, said, hey, look, we had thought that the regime, as he would call it, in Tel Aviv, the Zionist entity, he would call it, they don't recognize Jerusalem, of course, as the capital of Israel. We had said that they're going to be gone within the next 25 years. I believe he said that in 2017. Now, he said, we believe it's even sooner because of the internal dissension inside Israel. So I think the date's 2028. Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, thinks there's a very good chance that Israel will be gone by then, and he'll have a big role to play in that. He hasn't read the Bible, folks, obviously. From cover to cover, especially, Israel's not going anywhere. I love to cite the prophet Amos, who wrote that with the inspiration of God Almighty, that the people of Israel have returned to their ancestral homeland, never to be uprooted again. Ayatollah Khamenei, you might want to read some Amos and read the rest of the Bible while you're at it, because Israel is not going anywhere, never to be uprooted again. The days of exile for the people of Israel are over. I'm not naive. I know it's going to get very nasty, and a lot of nasty things will happen in the days to come. It's not going to be an easy ride, but the people of Israel are in the land to stay. So, hey, I mentioned 1993. Wow. Was that really 30 years ago? July 3rd, 1993. I've been it's one of those anniversaries. You know, usually I don't even think about this. Like the Apostle Paul says, you kind of put things in your rear view and you keep going. You keep walking in the Lord, and every day is an adventure. God, what do you have for me today? But sometimes you have to look back at not sometimes, a lot. You have to look back and just glorify God for what he's done in your life and what he's gotten you through. And you want to tell other people about it to encourage them and let them know that he's not done with them either. Hey, I don't know where you are in your life right now. You might be having a massive struggle, going through a divorce. You're estranged from a kid. You're having financial struggles. I don't know. But let me tell you one very low point in my life where God came through. July 3rd, 1993. I grew up in Philadelphia in a neighborhood called Fox Chase, which I love dearly, in Northeast Philadelphia. And that day, I was going to a 4th of July parade in a neighborhood called Longcrest, which was the next neighborhood over. And I was with some guys down there. I'm giving you a very, very condensed version that I probably shouldn't have been with. I was 17, young and foolish. A fight broke out, a major fight. And I tried to break this fight up. I tried to pull someone off a friend. And the next thing I know, I feel a horrific pain in the back of my head. You can see why I remember this very vividly 30 years later. I felt just a tremendous pain in the back of my head. And the first thing I thought was, well, someone sucker punched me from behind. And I remember turning around to face whoever hit me. And the next thing I remember, I was on my back and I felt with my tongue blood coming out of my mouth. And I looked up, I'm on my back. I'm a big guy. I'm about 6'5", big guy, and not the easiest maybe to knock down all the time. But I'm on my back and all these people are around me and they have these looks of grave concern on their faces. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, you win some, you lose some. I got knocked out. Someone beat me. I lost the fight. Why is everyone so upset? I don't understand. Next thing I know, I'm in the back of an ambulance with the sirens going and we're rushing to the hospital. And I'm still back there. I'm in tremendous pain. And I know I have blood on my face all over. I'm feeling it. I'm dazed and I'm out of it. And there's EMTs around me and they're trying to kind of converse with me and make sure, asking me what my name is, stuff like that, just to make sure I'm alert. And obviously I had a severe concussion. And I say obviously because as the EMT shared with me, it wasn't fists that I was hit with. It was a baseball bat, a Louisville Slugger. And I never saw it coming. And the EMT shared that with me in the back of the ambulance. He said, you were hit with a baseball bat. And I remember the first thought that entered my head was, I'm going to die. The next thought was, I'm going to have brain damage. And the third thought was, I'm never going to be the same. I was hit in the back of the head once with the baseball bat. I apparently spun around to face my attacker, who then hit me 3 times in the face, full force, with a baseball bat, with a Louisville Slugger. And then once for good measure, as I was falling to the ground, hit me in the abdomen. Whew. 30 years ago on July 3rd, I was 17. I'm 47 years old now. I was 17 years old. So I'm rushed to the hospital. And folks, I got to tell you, I've also been shot and I have a bullet in my hip. And talk about a teaser for the future. That's something I'll share. And if you're a longtime newscast viewer, you know part of my testimony. You may have heard this before, but since we have a lot of new viewers and subscribers since I last shared this, I figured I'd share this piece of it again because we just passed the anniversary this week again. I've been shot. I have a .22 caliber bullet in my hip. And folks, I can tell you, the baseball bat incident was much more traumatic, if you can imagine that. And that bullet, by the way, in my hip is way too close for comfort to my femoral or femoral artery. That's why they left it in. And if you get hit in the femoral artery, you pretty much are going to bleed out and die. So to say I've had 2 near-death experiences and that God Almighty spared my life twice is not an exaggeration. It's a fact. But back to the bat, so traumatic because I went to the hospital and folks, I can't tell you this TV face now. My wife would joke with me about that. But in all seriousness, I looked like the Elephant Man. You wouldn't have recognized me. My entire head was swollen. My eyes were swollen shut. My mouth, my jaw was out of whack. Broken nose, broken sinuses, a gash on the back of my head. You don't even want to know. And it was so bad that my parents, they had pictures. They threw them out. I don't have any pictures of that day and how I looked in that week. It was unbelievable as a 17-year-old guy. And I had everything to live for. I was going to a good school. I was on my way to getting a basketball scholarship for college. Good student. I was with the wrong crowd that day. Wrong place at the wrong time. And if you take anything from today, it's listen to your mother. My mother was a God-fearing woman who loved the Lord. I'll never forget leaving my house that day, Saturday, July 3rd, 1993, to go to this big 4th of July celebration in the next neighborhood over. And my mom says, I don't think you should go down there today. I have a bad feeling about this. My mom actually said that. Would you believe it? And I said, Mom, I'll be fine. And I hopped the SEPTA bus. That's what we took in Philly. And I went down. And I should listen to my mom. But lesson learned once again. Do you believe that? That was the Holy Spirit speaking through my mom. Don't go down there. Trying to talk reason to me, but I went and spent a week in intensive care, folks, in the hospital. Bad scene, CAT scans, my brain, everything else. But you know what? People were praying for me throughout that week. I mean, my hospital room became a gathering place for the entire neighborhood. All my buddies, everyone. There was not a day in that hospital room where there wasn't about 15 guys in there smuggling me cheesesteaks and chicken parm and everything else, all the good Philly food that I grew up on. And all my buddies, young guys, were 16, 17, 18 years old. And I had them all laughing. I was in good spirits. And I was in good spirits because people were praying for me. I mean, my mom, all the prayer warriors that she knew, they were all praying for me. And folks, I know that you heal quickly when you're young. You certainly do. For instance, I was shot when I was 23 years old, shot in the hip by a 22 caliber bullet. I was playing full court basketball 30 days later. You heal fast when you're young. But in this case, it was more than healing fast. I would say it was miraculous. I can't exaggerate to you, I mean, how bad I looked. And I had people come into my hospital room, grown men who were tough Philly guys who wept when they saw me because I was this big, energetic, outgoing guy, basketball player, a lot of friends, and I was down for the count. And it looked bad. And they thought I'd never be the same, just the optics of it. But it healed it so quickly over the course of 6 days. It was unbelievable to the point, by the time I left the hospital 6 days later, I remember my dad came and said, let's go grab a cheesesteak to celebrate. You're out of the hospital, you're alive. My dad, who was a tough guy as well, my whole family was shattered by it. It was a horrible thing. That was the worst part about it. It was so traumatic to see the concern. My family was so upset. And I felt so guilty what I put them through, because I made bad decisions. And I couldn't stop apologizing. They gave me complete grace. I was 17 years old. I was a knucklehead, as we would say in Philly. But by the time my dad picked me up, and we're getting to questions in a second, folks, let me tell you, that swelling went down dramatically. I looked like me again. But the joke was in the neighborhood that I looked like the Terminator from Terminator 2, because the only vestige, really, still some swelling, the whites of my eyes were completely red, broken blood vessels from that baseball bat. So they were calling me the Terminator when I got out of the hospital. But back playing basketball a few weeks later, and it was unbelievable. It would be unbelievable if not for God and what he did and what he got me through there on July 3rd, 1993, 30 years ago. Folks, I should not be sitting here today. I truly believe that. I could, in the very least, have brain damage. If you ask my wife, she would say I do indeed have brain damage. But in all seriousness, we like to tease each other. But in all seriousness, you're not looking at a more blessed man. You don't know someone more blessed. I really feel that way. To survive the gunshot, but been in a very introspective mood, I guess you could say, this week, thinking back 30 years ago to July 3rd, 1993. And someone asked about the perpetrator as we get the questions here. The guy who did it, never even saw him. He was also a 17-year-old. I didn't know him. I never saw it coming. I was trying to break the fight up. I never saw it coming. And a double whammy, by the way, my dad was a disabled veteran, and he had just lost his job. We had no health benefits, and I'm staying in the hospital for a week. So to say it was a tumultuous, stressful time for our family in a working class neighborhood of Philadelphia is an understatement. But the perpetrator never was brought to justice. He was caught. He was arrested at the time. And my dad and I remember we met with an attorney, and the attorney said, look, he's got witnesses on his side that are saying your side started the fight, and it's not going to be easy. It might cost you guys some money. My dad was in bad health. And I know this greatly, greatly pained my father, who passed away in 2003. My mom passed away in 2020. My dad was young; he was only 60 when he passed. This just killed him, but we dropped it, and we just said, we can't proceed. Then we don't have the money as a family. My dad was in poor health and really deteriorating. The stress of it all, we let it go. And folks, let me tell you, there's only been a few times over the past 30 years where I have thought about it. I just kind of marched on. I said, okay. I marched. Well, what really hit me was New Year's that year, 1993, turning to 1994. I was, overwhelmed with emotion. I'm alive to see another year. That's how I felt. And it really, truly hit me in November 1994. A dear friend of mine was killed by baseball bats. His name was Eddie Pollock, and I loved him. And he was a dear friend who I grew up with. We shared the birthday, January 21st. Eddie was attacked with baseball bats, and he was killed, murdered. So that obviously, I think about that a great deal. I think about Eddie a great deal in his memory, and I'll see him in heaven one day, no doubt. I'm going to see him in heaven. We're going to reunite. But this was one of those weeks where I thought about it. 30 years is a long time. It seems like yesterday, right? I mean, for some of us, I'm 47. If you're a little longer in the tooth like me, like I'm getting, 30 years, it seems like a blink of an eye, right? I was out there playing full court basketball, 17 years old, not a care in the world. But man, what a journey it's been, and to walk with the Lord. And by the way, I wasn't born again. I didn't accept Jesus into my heart and become a new creation in Christ until I was 32 years old. So I was a late bloomer. I grew up in a praying family. Thank God for my mom and dad. My dad loved Israel. He knew the Bible. My mom was just a prayer warrior. Thank God, because I got to tell you, folks, I put them through some tough times. And it's funny. I laugh. I think about it. I was born January 21st, 1976, in the middle of a snowstorm. And I think that was a predictor for the kind of, and I was a C-section as well. My mom's only C-section baby. I'm one of three, but that was a predictor of some of the hard times, but also there was a whole lot of great times too. And every day since, it would be 2009 when I accepted the Lord. Every day has been an adventure and a journey. And I have a whole new perspective on that baseball bat, that gunshot, and so many other things that happened in my life. After I started walking with the Lord, I have an entirely new perspective, an entirely new appreciation. Every day is a gift. He will never leave you or forsake you. And I mentioned this in the last live stream. I promise we're getting to questions in a minute. I mentioned this on the last live stream. I'm going to mention it again. There's a great poem that I love called Footprints. And my mom, when I was in the hospital, baseball bat, I felt like I was near death. I looked like I was near death, certainly in intensive care, all banged up, broken bones throughout my face. And my mom gave me this bookmark. I was a voracious reader. I still am. And I'm reading books in the hospital room. And this bookmark entitled Footprints, this guy is looking out over his life. He's talking to the Lord and saying, you were always with me, but in the hardest times, where were you? They're walking down the beach together. There was two sets of footprints. One was Jesus. One was the guy telling the story. And he said to Jesus, during the hardest time, there's only one set of footprints. Where were you when I needed you the most? And Jesus said, my child, during that time, there was only one set of footprints because that's when I was carrying you. Those are my footprints. And my mom gave me that bookmarker when I was in the hospital after being beat with the bat. I've kept it for 30 years and I've ordered it from Amazon.com and I've sent that bookmarker to other people. So God will never leave you or forsake you. Again, I don't know where you are in your life, how low you are right now, but I was in the pit. I was in the pit, and that's not the first time. And he extended his hand filled with grace and pulled me out. So don't give up. With Jesus, there is always, always, always hope. I felt prompted to share that today. Usually this is geopolitics and what's going on in the world, but I was thinking about this throughout the week, and I said, I want to share because I was kind of surprised how July 3rd affected me, that 30-day anniversary or 30-year anniversary. Not affected me in some negative, horrible way, but just I was very kind of introspective about it and talking to the Lord about it and thanking God. I just felt prompted to share it. When the Holy Spirit nudges you, you should do what he says to do. And I shared today, and I hope that it impacted someone out there. Let's get some questions real quick. And if we have to go a few minutes longer today, we can, because I know I took up a little bit of time sharing part of my testimony there. I hope you all, I don't know if enjoyed is the word to use when someone is violently assaulted, but in all seriousness, I don't know where you are in your life. Maybe it helped to strengthen your faith, or maybe it gave you hope or encouragement. That was the intention of sharing it. And just in front of thousands of people, just to publicly testify what God has done for me and to glorify his name and to thank him in front of people from around the world, to thank him for what he's done in my life. I would not be sitting here right now without God. I know it. And I'm forever there. There's no way I can pay him back, because Jesus paid that penalty, the free gift of salvation. We can never repay God. We just accept that free gift of salvation and marvel at his love and his unending grace. Let's get to questions here. This is a good question from Denver Johnson. Russia being vulnerable with the internal rebellion. Okay, with Russia being vulnerable with that recent internal rebellion by the Wagner Group, will this affect Iran's position as they depend on them for support? What are your thoughts on this, Eric? Well, it's interesting. Do you mean affect Iran's position? Who depends on who? Do you mean Russia depending on Iran or Iran depending on Russia? I would say it's kind of a quid pro quo relationship these days. Now, a few years ago, before the Ukraine invasion, I would say Russia, look, is clearly the senior partner in that relationship with Iran. Iran is, if anything, dependent on Russia. But Russia now has become at least somewhat dependent on those Iranian drones, and Iran replenishing Russia's military for the Ukraine campaign, not just with drones, but with ammunition and other sorts of weaponry as well. So if Russia is vulnerable to internal rebellion, that's a good question. It would depend if, and hey, folks, today, expect the unexpected in today's world, in these prophetic, upside down Bible times that we're living in. But if Vladimir Putin were to go, which I don't believe is outside the realm of possibility, eventually, if things continue to go badly in Ukraine, is he taken out in terms of, is there a coup? I think that absolutely has to be considered, especially after what we saw a week and a half ago with an almost march on Moscow by the Wagner Group, by Prigozhin. So what happens to that Russia-Iran relationship in a post-Vladimir Putin climate? Maybe the next leader isn't as friendly to the Iranian regime, but, I doubt it, because, again, Russia, that has become really a formalized military and defense alliance. And Russia has become quite reliant on that Iranian weaponry, in specific those drones. So I look for that relationship to continue, folks, I have to say. And Iran is looking for the payback eventually. We know that. What does Iran get in return? Russia is committed to supplying Iran with fighter jets. We know that. And supplying Iran with other forms of weaponry. Would Russia even help Iran with its nuclear program? So a lot going on for sure there in that relationship. Michelle Secord, I think it's how you pronounce it. Question, is it possible for Israel to get to Iran's nuclear weapons that are inside of mountains? Of course, it's always, but God, only God. Michelle, in the natural, I'm glad you said, but God. In the natural, man, it looks like a tall order, right? Those Iranian nuclear facilities, at least some of them, like Natanz, are buried deep underground. They're fortified. You'll need bunker-busting bombs that the U.S. has been hesitant to supply to Israel. Surprise, surprise, under the Biden administration. The bunker-busting, deep penetrator type bombs could conceivably reach them. But you have to think, look, Israel has been planning this and planning it and replanning it and revising their plans for over a decade for a potential strike against Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. Israel has gone over every possible contingency, I'm sure. And judging by Israel's history of daring operations, and we could go on and on from 1967 to Entebbe to the modern day, you have to think the Israeli military will have something up its sleeve. I have no idea what or how they'll do it, but if Israel's going to take that step and they're going to follow through and actually attack Iran's nuclear facilities, you best believe that they're not going into that blind. They know exactly what they're up against and what they're doing, and that there is a very, very, very good chance of success. They're not going to go in on a failed mission and just try to no avail, on a wing and a prayer, try to bomb these underground facilities that are buried inside mountains. If they're going to take that step, they're going to feel confident that they have the capability to complete the mission successfully. Hopefully that answers. Michelle Evans asks, Eric, have you ever considered writing a book? I think others also seeing your testimony in book form would help others. Michelle, I'm glad you asked. I've written 3 books. The first book, 2011, was called The Terrorist Next Door. The second book was called The Brotherhood. The third book was called ISIS Exposed. That was 2015. You can find them all on Amazon.com. They were 2011, 2013, 2015. So it was Middle East reporting, terrorism reporting, a lot of my personal on-the-ground experiences. The books did very well. They sold very well. And but the book on my heart now, Michelle, is my testimony. I want to share my story. It's so much deeper than the Cliff Notes version I shared today. I feel a burning desire to share my testimony. And I was just on the beach for a few days with my family, and I was working on it, taking notes. I'm trying to flesh this thing out. I have to get it on paper. I could see it even being a movie or a documentary, not because I'm anything special, but because it's such an improbable story and because of what God did in my life. I just want to get the message out there and share it with people. Time is short. And if I can play some small contribution to bringing even one person into the kingdom through sharing my testimony, I'm going to do it. So, Michelle, I'm glad you asked that. I starting now, the gears are turning, and I'm just trying to figure out how to put it all together. But my 4th book, I certainly want to be my autobiography, my testimony for such a time as this. Folks, I got to run. I have another job duty to get to for TBN here, but I know I went a little long today and I didn't get to as many questions as we usually would. But I just felt prompted to share that personal story of the baseball bat and how God got me through it 30 years ago on July 3rd, 1993. God is good, and he's faithful. Even when we're not, he is. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today. God bless all of you. Until tomorrow, remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.